I'm Minister Johnnie Bedford, born in Jeanerette, Louisiana. And in Louisiana, I can remember a lot of things. Number one is the houses we used to live in. We lived in a row of houses, little shotgun houses. I mean, it was a row of like blocks of them. And nobody lived in that area but black folk. And they had a fence all the way around that area that you had to go over some stairs in order to get out. And to me, not knowing, I enjoyed it because we were all at nighttime, we would have games that we would play, and the parents would all be out there joining in. We used to have a lot of fun because everybody knew everybody. There was a certain time of year when they had hog killing, and everybody in that neighborhood who had hog would bring their hog to this certain area, and they would kill them, slice them, whatever they be doing, and everybody, all the kids would be out having fun. And this to me was a togetherness that I will never forget. And then another thing that I can remember in those old houses, you had to go over the stairs in order to get out. Do you remember that, Sylvia? We used to climb over stairs in order to get out, to get to the main street, to walk miles and miles to the store. And then there's another thing, while we were in Louisiana, my father, which was named Johnnie Allison, was ran out of Louisiana. He was told to get out. And I remember the night that he left, and I guess they were waiting on him because we never heard from him from that day to this one. We never heard from him ever again. So we just assumed that they waited on him and they killed him. And we never did know. So that's one of the things that I'll always have in my mind, wondering whatever happened to my dad when he left that night. And then one of the other things that I remember is when we would, as black folks, if we were walking down a sidewalk and a white person was walking on the sidewalk, you had to get off the sidewalk until they passed. I know y'all don't know nothing about this, but we walking on it, and the white folk come, even if it's a trail, because they didn't have a lot of sidewalks, but if it's a trail and they're walking on that trail, you had to get off of the trail and let them by. And I thought, you know, I didn't like the idea as a child that we had to get off the sidewalk. Why? But that question was never answered, but I found out later. And then they had I know all of y'all remember the colored faucets and the white faucets. Now, being a child and being the person that I am, I always went and drank out the white fountain. And my mama slapped me upside the head one time and said, "You know better than that." But the next time I did the same thing. Now, that water was nice and cold, but our water was not. And so, you know, and I thought to myself, now why I got to be drinking out of, you know, this faucet? And then I found out when I first went over there and drank out that white fountain, that it was nice and cold. And we black folk had to drink the regular old water. Amen. And I happen to be one of those that during that time when we decided to go a fight against it, and we would go downtown and sit at the counters. And I'm telling you, they had white police and all the folks trying to, I mean, it was a whole lot of black folk sitting at the counters so that we could start being served. And I happened to be one of those that would go downtown and sit at the counter and fight against them not serving us food at the counter. We had to tell them what we wanted, they bring it to us. We had to stay in a certain area. And as I think about that now, I think that was just so awful, you know, but nothing you could do. And when and I said, I sitting at that counter, and I remember one day sitting there, how they came up and told us we better get up from the counter or we gonna all be arrested. And some of the guys that was there say, well, you just might as well arrest us because we're not getting them. But that caused all of us to be able now to go in and sit at the counter wherever we want to sit. And I thank God for that area of my life. And my Uncle Tom, my mother was in a hospital downtown. and me and my Uncle Tony, her brother, went downtown to see her. And when he and I got on the elevator driver told him, I'm sorry, but she can't go up on ride the elevator now. And he said, well, why not? She said, because she's black. He said, well, if she can't ride, I can't ride because I'm black too. And so we both got off the elevator. And finally we got a chance to ride up the elevator together. But we had to be about it. And I thought that was, why would I, this is horrible. I was just a little child. I had to get off the elevator because I couldn't ride. Because my uncle looked like a white man. My God. When you think about that now, it kind of, gets next to you. And still today, we are being segregated against. So, all of those things that I remember as a child, and as I think about it today, there are some places I don't even want to go. Because I remember how you were. And that is something that I will never forget. How we had to treat the white man. But my Bible said, he that is last shall be first. He that is first shall be last. And I can see that day has come to a change. Amen. Amen.
My name is Silver Smith, and I'm from Jeanerette, Louisiana. My mother was also from South Louisiana, and during those years, they were called, or she was called, I guess I can say they, because they were called mulattoes. And her mother passed when she was very young, so she was raised by her brother and her oldest sister. And the brother lived here in Houston. In fact, he lived in Fourth Ward, which is Freemanstown. And he was a barber on Dallas. He had a barber shop. He worked with other people. And so she came to live with him. She was back and forth. She went to Gregory Elementary School. That's in Fourth Ward. That still exists today. And she went to Negro High. And but my mother went back to Louisiana to stay with her sister. And she said it was because she was having such a hard time here. Because of her complexion and her grade of hair, she felt unaccepted by blacks and definitely unaccepted by whites. And so she went back to Louisiana. And once she got married and had children, she moved back. And when she came back, I was about 5 years old. And so I don't know a whole lot. I don't remember a whole lot about Louisiana. My brother always, Leonard, asked me things about Louisiana, but I don't remember a lot. But my sister Johnnie can remember. But when we moved to Houston, we moved first to the Heights and then to Fifth Ward area close to Frenchtown. And we had a pretty good upbringing. And, as we might have been poor, but we don't remember that because we always had food and clothes and the necessary things that we needed. But I can remember the times that we had to, as a little girl, be careful what we did, what we said, and we always I went to Crawford Elementary School. It was an all-black school, and at that time we didn't have but 3 black high schools, and that was Phyllis Wheatley, where I attended, Jackie Yates, and Booker T. Washington. And at that time, Booker T. Washington was in Fourth Ward. But now we've been blessed, and it's just through the grace of God that our children now can go wherever they have a choice. We didn't have a choice. In Fifth Ward, at one time, we didn't have a park. And finally, we got Finnegan Park. And then, but what is called Emancipation Park now was the park to go to. And they had all of these big events for whites. And I can remember we could only go, it was on Main Street. Can't remember the name, what they would call it, but it was way down.
Playland Park.
What was it?
Playland Park
Playland Park.
on Main Street.
But it was for white only. And the ministers got together, and they were able to get us one day a year that we could go, and that was Juneteenth. So on Juneteenth, the blacks were able to go to Playland Park and enjoy everything that was there. And of course, as children coming up, we were excited, but it was, this whole city was just so segregated. And if you got on the bus, you would have to go to the back of the bus and the front of the train. I mean, it was just sad. It was just sad. And I can remember when my children got to be teenagers, we was living in Cashmere Gardens, and my kids that was going to high school, they were really going to be able to go to Kashmir, which they were all excited about, but they was trying to integrate the school, and they were the first ones to integrate Sam Houston, their class. And I can remember my daughter that one, was so afraid to go. She wouldn't even go to the restroom because the white kids was so terrible, and I would be at work and I would get a call and say there's a riot. Well, of course, I'd left work right away in my car, company-owned car. And there I was at that school. So we stayed more time at that school almost than the children did. And then they really tried. There was a ombudsman there named Reverend McKnight, and he really tried to help all of the black kids that he could. But segregation was real, and it was ugly. Although we were living in Cashmere Garden, we were the subdivision was Huntington's Addition, and my husband had bought a house out there for us, and they would egg the house. I mean, we went through it, and we lived this. It was just becoming black community. We was moving in, and we was the first one in those 2 blocks, and they did us bad. My husband, I was afraid for my children, but my husband was militant, and I mean, he was, and so we were able to stay there because, I can remember the children throwing the ball in my backyard, and if the ball happened to roll in this man's yard, he would get it and keep it. And my husband traveled a lot, and so when he did get in, he went over and talked to the man, and it cooled him off because, like I said, he was a little militant during that time, and that that kind of cooled him off. But when we were coming up, the things that I really kind of regret. My mother had a hard time when she moved here because of the color of her skin and her hair and all of that. And her family spoke Creole, but my mother would not speak it, and she would not allow her sisters and brothers, because their complexion was really light, and some of them did pass for white. I think she had 2 brothers that left and went up north, and they just passed, and never came back to the family. because they married outside of their races. And, but, you know, I can just, it was just a hard time for her. But I regret that she would not allow them to speak the language to us, because when they would come to the house, she would let them know, no. And the only time her sister would speak it is when she would get angry at us, so we would do something we didn't have any business to do, and then she would start, you know, she would let loose in her native tongue, I'll say. And we did learn a few words, as my sister says, she know a few words. We learned some, but the ones I learned was, you know, we weren't allowed to say. And so we might say it, you know, with each other, but we was not allowed to do that. And I think that was a disservice to her children. And now when you go back to South Louisiana, it's a very few that speak in the language, and they used to teach it in school, and now, from what I can understand, they do not. And I think that's a sad thing, that they didn't, because that was our heritage, and I think she should have. But then I can understand where she was coming from, because when she would speak, they would tease her and make fun, and so she didn't want us to go through that. She wanted a better life for us. That's the reason why she moved here in the first place to Texas, so that we could have a better life. And certainly, I must agree, she was right. Her children did go on to have a better life, you know. We went through the segregation thing, but we became stronger men and women because of the fight that she fought. And also, I think our children are stronger because of the things that we went through and the things that they went through, because my children, like I said, was the first group, their class was the first group to go over and integrate Sam Houston. And I think they were made aware. I mean, some of the things, it was kind of hard for my daughter, but I had two boys over there with her. And of course, it was a different thing for them, because they was ready, you know. They didn't mind. It was like their daddy. They didn't mind getting into it, you know. But my daughter was a little different, you know. She didn't like confrontation and that kind of stuff. But she ended up being the first black cheerleader that Sam Houston had. And so it was a lot of things that my children went through, and a lot of things that we went through. But I thank God that my grandchildren were able to be selective about where they wanted to go to school. They, you know, Texas Southern is a fine school, but they didn't have to go there if they chose not to. The Prairie View is a beautiful school, and I've had about 5 graduates from there, but it was by their choice that they went there. And so I just thank God for that. I became an adult, and I decided to get in the political field, and I enjoyed that, you know, working with Mickey Leland and Franco Lee, just having the Barners. And, you know, I just enjoyed that. You know, I was a precinct judge for about 35, 40 years, precinct 344. And because it was all white when we moved out there, and when they were in, you know, the neighborhood was in transition. And so the white precinct judge asked me if I would come and be there and with her as a clerk. And I did. I accepted it. And then a few years she stayed there, and then she left, and I became precinct judge. And that was a time when they would appoint the commissioners would appoint. But before they started the appointing precinct judges, we had to run for it, and I did. And each time I would run, I would win. And so we had an opportunity to go to the various state convention, Democratic state convention, and just everything. And I remember a lot of those young people that was working alongside of me, that we got close, we became close. Sylvia Garcia, some of them are still in politics now. And of course, I chose to back out and give it because I had some issues, health issues. And so I just retired from all political. I will vote. Everybody in my family has to vote when they get 18. There's 2 things that they have to do, and that's register to vote. Now, they can vote their choice, but they do have to vote. Although I might give them a hint, but they still, it's up to them. And so I think we've come a long way, very long way. We've seen a lot of things in our time, but through the grace of God, we're here.
Amen.
And we were able to. We had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. They all finished high school, and they all had an opportunity to go to college and graduate and do what they do. So most of them are in education, and so I'm just blessed, and I thank God for the journey through my parents that I had. It was a blessed thing, and one thing she taught us, to put God first, and that's what we did. And I tell my children, and now my children are telling their children, and I hope their children will tell their children that put God first, and it's no telling where you will end up, because the world don't belong to the Karens. They belong to the Almighty God.
I'm Samuel Smith. I was born in a little old town, East Texas town, Alto, Texas. And being in Alto as a child, I didn't know about segregation and all that other stuff, because where we lived, we were surrounded by white families. And being surrounded by white families, let me back up. My father worked for the judge in Alto, Texas, Judge Fitzgerald. And Judge Fitzgerald said to my father that he need to have his own place, his own farm. And my father related this to me, that he said to the judge, I don't have anything to work with. I don't have any money, being a black man. And the judge said to my father, I'm going to give you a parcel of land. And he gave my dad 500 acres because the judge owned everything in the little town, and gave him 500 acres, gave my father $1,000 cash, gave my father equipment to work with and livestock. In other words, he set my dad up to where my dad could live an independent life. And so my father, when he would go to this little, in this little town, to the Jan to take his cotton everybody in that town just assumed that my father was working for the church. And he didn't make any bones about it. He just kept his mouth shut and did what he wanted to do. But the judge died, and he was still going to the little town, ginning his cotton and corn and all of that. And they wanted to know from him, was he still working for the judge? And my father, being like he was, let them know that he had never worked for the judge on this parcel of ground, that he was working for himself. And being in this little segregated town, I need to back up again. My father was part Indian and part West Indian, because my grandfather was West Indian. And my father's mother was Choctaw Cherokee, and she I heard the light-skinned kind of thing. My grandmother was very fair. She had long black hair, and she naturally looked like where she came from. She was Choctaw Cherokee. And all of my father's siblings came into this world looking like my grandmother. In other words, they had light skin, beautiful hair, and all that kind of thing. And so, but they did not stay in the little town where we were. They moved to various places. My father, being in the little town where he was, brought my grandmother to live with him. And my grandmother, living with us in this little town, I enjoyed her because having Indian in the house was just, it was phenomenal. And when my grandmother would sit down and be combing her hair and roll her hair up and put those bone hairpins in her hair, I would ease up behind her, snatch the pins out, because I enjoyed seeing that long hair coming down and touching the floor. And so this was a happy moment in my life. And this happy moment was interrupted because my grandmother was coming from downtown. And a white fella ran over her with his truck and killed her. And the statement that came from him was that he did not want a white woman living with the Ind people. My father was dark, but he had the complexion and the texture and the hair like the others, but he was just dark. He took after his father, which was West Indian. And when they killed my grandmother, ran over her, that caused something in my father that he died with, and that was, he had hatred in his heart for white folk, because it was a white man that ran over his mother. And because he had that kind of mentality, naturally, it rubbed off on us. And I had the same kind of spirit that my father had, because I hated the Caucasian, the whites, because of that. However, being in this little town, being independent, not really having to hustle for anything or anything like that, because my father was well established because of the church that established him. However, when they ran over my grandmother, that caused a great friction in that town between the blacks and the whites, because they really and truly did not want blacks to become independent. They wanted them to have the slave mentality, stay in that way. But my father lived an independent life because he never considered himself to being underprivileged or down or rejected or what have you. And this was engrossed in us. I grew up like that. I grew up not really feeling inferior. And I like to throw this in. My daddy always told us, as he talked to us, he said, don't let nobody make you feel inferior, but you are superior because of who you are. And that was engrossed in us. So going on, when they killed my grandmother, and my father could not overcome that. However, being in this town, they wanted to get rid of my father. They wanted to break him down, take his the property from him, and all this kind of stuff. And so they set up a means to take from my father that land. And the means was they placed a sewing machine in the house and said to my father, you can pay for it the way you want to. However, once they put that sewing machine in the house, then they came at my father and said, we want our money. My father had put all of his money in the ground, seed-wise, and planted corn and planted cotton and planted potatoes and things. In other words, he said to the fella, as soon as my crop come in, then I'll pay you. And the guy said, no, I want my money now. And my father said to him, go and get that sewing machine that you put in the house. I haven't used it anyway. And the man, this is 1938, the man came and drove his car into our flower bed. We had some of the most beautiful roses that you ever want to lay your eyes on, and drove his car in the flower bed. And once he did that, my sister, who was 4 years older than me, told the man, said, Mister, get your car out of our flower bed. He said, you go back in the house, use that N-word, go back in the house. And my sister said to him, say, I'm gonna tell you something that you probably don't wanna know. If my father see your car in his flower bed, he's gonna get a hold of you. And the man said, that's what I hope will happen. And the plan was to take the land that had been given to us by Judge Fitzgerald. And what happened? What happened is that when my father came home and saw that car in the flower bed, he said to that white man, move your car, for you got your car in my flower bed. And he used the N-word again and told him, say, get out of my face. So my daddy didn't say another word. He just went and got him a stick, one or two sticks, and came back to that car and took that stick and whipped that man. I mean, he whipped him. And the man ran in the house. When he ran in the house, my father went in the house, got his shotgun, loaded his shotgun, and shot that man. And he jumped out the house running, and my daddy shot him twice more before he got to his car. And when he got in his car, he took off. However, where our land was, we were adjacent to another farm which was owned by white people. And the white man that was in that owned that farm, my father and him sharecropped. In other words, when they got ready to gather up their crops, we, not me because I wasn't old enough, but my older brothers and sisters would help them gather their crop. And then when my father's crop came to being, then they helped my father gather up his crop. So that was a relationship that my father had with the white man. However, when he shot that man, and he ran to town and got a vigilante committee. And when he got that vigilante committee, on his way back to our house, the white neighbor said to my father, Wallace, you know, they're gonna kill you. I want you to get in my car. And I'm gonna hide you until they get through searching for you. And I'm gonna take you somewhere where it's safe. And he took my father and hid him. And when the vigilante came looking for my father, the white man that had my father hid in his car said, I saw him running across the woods. And they took off, looked for my father that whole day, couldn't find him. That night, the man took and put my father on the train, and he came to Houston. We didn't know where he was because he had to leave that way. For a whole year, from 1938 to 1939, we did not know where my father was. My father sent for us. He sent for us. And what he said to us was, through the man he sent for us, he said, don't get any clothing, just get in the car, because they were watching the house. And he said, get in the car, and he gonna bring y'all to me. We left this little town, Alto, in 1938, and came to Houston, Texas. 1939, I'm sorry. 1939, we left and came to Houston, Texas. However, I began to sense as a young kid I began to sense there was a vast difference in nationalities. While I was in Alto, I didn't know the difference because we lived like they lived. Whatever they had, whatever the whites had, we had it. Whatever they drove, we drove it. Whatever they experienced, we experienced it. However, in this little town, I need to bring this in, blacks had to go around to the back of the store, and they had to go and sit upstairs in the theater. We didn't do that. When we went to town, we walked through the front door because they felt like my father was employed by the judge, and if they said anything to him, the judge would get on their case. So we didn't have to worry about this kind of thing. So I didn't know anything about segregation. I didn't know anything about being separate but equal, all that kind of stuff, because the way we lived. But when we got to Houston, we started experiencing a difference in life. And I heard my sister-in-law as she talked about this white and black fountains, what have you. Being a kid, I didn't know there was a difference. Being a kid, I thought that everything was the same. But when I got to Houston, I tell you, I began to experience this segregational thing. I began to experience all of these kind of situations. But because of what my daddy said to us, don't you feel inferior to nobody, but you be superior to everybody. I had that arrogance about me. So when I walked into the Bourne bus station, and there was this colored and white, I went to the white and drank out of the white. I want to see what's the difference in the waters. And I found out that the water was the same. And being in Houston, they had a sign on the bus that it would slide backwards and forth. The sign on one side said colored, the sign on the other side said white. And wherever that sign would slide to, that's where the blacks had to sit. If they slid it all the way back to the back of the bus, all you had was the back of the bus seat. You couldn't sit nowhere else. But my father had messed me up. Don't let nobody make you feel inferior, but feel superior to all. So I didn't pay any attention to that sign. I'd sit down wherever I wanted to sit. However, I need to throw this in. I carried a big knife with me as a kid. I got that knife when my daddy jumped on that white man. I started packing that knife. And in my heart, I had said, when I grow up to be a man, I'm going to kill me a whole bunch of white folk. Because they killed my grandmother. Because they put my father out of his house and took our land. And so I had this thing in me. And as I sat on that bus, I never shall forget, I was going to Studiowood. And they had the sign all the way back to the back seat. I sat down on the front. And the bus driver said, you get up from here and go back there. I said, this is a seat. So I'm sitting in it. And he came at me, and when he did, I pulled my knife out of my pocket. I said, you put your hands on me, I'll cut your hand off. He called for the police, and the police looked at me and said, he's crazy, so don't bother with him. And so I experienced that. In 1947, I left from here and went into the service. And in service, I experienced what segregation was all about. Because there was the black soldier and the white soldier. There was the black camp and the white camp. They were not integrated. They were very much segregated. When I went into the army, I experienced a whole lot of things. But in 1948, when they started breaking segregation down, I finished basic training in Fort Knox, Kentucky. The company commander said to me, I'm going to send you to Fort Eustis, Virginia, to go to plumbing school. It's an all-white campus. And I'm going to send you to go to plumbing school. And he sent me to Fort Eustis, Virginia, all-white camp. I'm the only black. So when I arrived, I had my own space, I had my own shower, I had my own table in the mess hall. And I thought I'd make a joke out of it. So I went to the mess hall and sat down at the table and begged for some service. And the white cook told me, get my so-and-so up and get in line. And I said to him, I said, well, if you're going to treat me with royalty, then I want royalty given to me. And he said, there's no royalty here. And I had to go through all of those things. And so when I finished plumbing school, I throw this in, when I finished plumbing school and got ready to take the final exam, the instructor said to me, you'll have to stay in here. Let all the white students go out. I said, why? Because you cheated. I saw you copying off of that white boy's paper. I said, man, I didn't cheat. He said, you made 92 on the score, and I know you cheated. So I said, if I got to stay in here and take the exam over, I want another instructor in here. Another instructor came in with us, and I took the exam over. The first exam that they gave me was mathematics. I could handle that. But the second exam they gave me was trigonometry. I didn't know anything about that because I was a dropout, so to speak, from high school, and I won't go into that. But so when they gave me that second exam, I took it. And the instructor that stayed in there with me said, you can leave, Sam. You made a passing grade. I said, what was it? Instructor that told me to stay in here said, you don't need to know, use the N-word again, get out of here. And so the instructor that was in there with him said, you made 94. I made 92 on the first one. I made 94 on the second one.
Okay.
All of this going through the segregational movement, which was really saying that there is a vast difference between nationalities, but there is no vast difference between nationalities. If you think well, you'll be well. If you think low down, you'll be low down. If you think negativeness, you'll be negative. Whatever your thinking is, that's how you can become. And so my thoughts were always on the upper hand. I did not ever think negative. I did not ever think that I was less than anybody else because of what was engrossed in me through my father. Don't let nobody tell you that you're inferior. You think superior. And I want to tell you, down through the years, being in the segregational way, this has been my whole venture, my whole life, is as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he.
Amen.
And I did not ever think negativism in my heart. I always thought the real life, amen. And so when in 48, when I finished plumbing school, I need to tell you this, because you ought not to let the skin color make you feel inferior. You ought to let your heart, your mind, your thoughts be your method of causing you to move forward. And so when I left the plumbing school and they sent me from there to Japan, I had experience in Japan. In other words, what I'm really saying is that you ought to be the barrier breaker. No matter who you are, you ought to be the barrier breaker. No matter what you are, you ought to set the standards and the precedent for life. No matter who you are, no matter how everybody in the world came into this world to be somebody because God made us somebody.
All right.
God intended for us to be somebody. And so when I got to Japan, I'm trying to rush now. When I got to Japan, again, they used me as a guinea pig to break down segregation. They sent me to another all-white campus. And being there, I found out that they had need of a mindset of people that had the ability to do things. So I set the example in Japan for other young blacks coming along. Don't let nobody make you feel inferior. I worked and moved so until I broke down segregational barriers in that company. And they moved me from that company and brought me back to America. No, I went to Korea and 1950 in Korea. I was in Korea, and again, barriers were being broken. I moved from Korea in 1951, came back to the States, and in 1951, they sent me to a school again to learn how to be a team chief. And so when I finished that school, they gave me my orders in 1952 and sent me to Augusta, Georgia. And when I got to Augusta, Georgia, they sent me to an all-white campus. When I walked into that campus with my orders in my hand, the adjutant looked at me and said, "We don't have your kind here."
Okay. Now.
All right.
We don't have your kind here. I don't know why they sent you. I said, give me my orders. I'll go back to Fort Knox and let them know that you came against me in a segregational way. The old man said, just wait a minute. And he went back in the office, he came back out. He said, I'm glad you came. We've been waiting for somebody like you. Do you mind working in the field? I didn't know what that was. I was sent there to teach on the campus. I want you to hear what I'm saying, because your life means everything to you. They sent me out in the field. They gave me 242 students to, in 6 weeks, shape them up so that they can graduate. The 242 students were students that had already flunked on the campus. I didn't know that. They gave them to me for 6 weeks. I'm supposed to do with them 6 weeks what they have not done with them in 5 months. However, and I'm coming to a close, however, when I got those 242 students, 10 white instructors helping me. Those 242 students had already flunked, but in 6 weeks, God blessed me and those that were working with me to fix those 242 students. They all graduated. And so when that happened, and I'm closing now, when that happened, then my adjutant said to me, say, Sam, re-enlist, because my time was up, re-enlist and stay here in Augusta, because we need you. We need your motivation. We need your brain set. We need, and so I wrote a letter to my wife and said to her that they have set me up in Augusta for duration, so to speak. What she said to me is that you'll either divorce that or divorce me. So I let the army go.
Of course.
Because I sure wasn't going to divorce her. And for 67 years, we've been together. But don't let segregation stop you from being whatever you want to become.
Amen.
Trust God with all your heart. Bless you.
My name is Richard Wilson, and I was born January 11, 1944, which ought to be a national holiday. But all these people in this room here, I grew up with. Sam probably raised most of us. And but my sister is my best friend, and I love her. But as a kid coming up, we lived in a little community part of Fifth Ward called Frenchtown, and listened to Johnnie and Sylvia and all about their parenting and the Creole that was in their families. There's a whole lot of white folks in Houston passing for white that Louisiana said they're black. You know, they're the one with that one drop rule. You have one drop of black blood in you, you're black. So, like I say, we grew up not knowing we was poor because we had everything that we wanted for. Never had to ask for anything. Plenty of food. There was always monies in the house. We had several rent houses. So we did what we thought was good. My mother on Christmas would have a toy for every kid in the neighborhood. They would come to our house and get a Christmas toy. But now I come to religion in a later life. I was out there on the street for a while, not doing anything illegal, no drugs or none of that, but I was amongst those people that was doing it. Had my parents known at the time where I would be, I'd probably still be in the wilderness, because we had a club called the Club Matinee up on Lyons Avenue. And during that time, some of the best gamblers, the biggest pimps in the world would come there. Well, these guys would teach me how to shoot pool and different things. It was just known not to mess with Richard. And like I said, my parents had known where I was. It was been a hard day for me. But I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot about the streets, you know. You're talking about the economy and all right now. And if the economy will not be doing good until those people that's doing those sort of things start putting money back into the economy. That's where the little people are the ones that spend money. But my life, we'll talk about the railroad. And when I first went to the railroad, I was the first black journeyman electrician at Southern Pacific High in Houston. Now, that might sound good now, but at the time, I went through pure hell, because I got the dirtiest jobs, which was redoing what they call traction motors. If you look at an engine, each wheel on the engine has a big motor on it, and they call this a traction motor. And what it does, it reverses the polarity on that wheel, and it was a braking system. But it had a lot of asbestos in it, and it would slow the engines down. And but it was the dirtiest job there on that particular part of the job. And I remember working in the shop. There were very few of the young ones, older people, that knew how to read a blueprint. And at that time, the headquarters in San Francisco was changing over some of the switch engines here in the Houston area. And what they was doing was changing all the electrical systems on them. But they were sending out these blueprints that nobody could read. So me and there were about 3 other young white guys knew how to read blueprints. So we was basically one that redoing the job. Well, my foreman was a real hater, but he had a son-in-law that he wanted me to train. So he put him on as my apprentice. And I remember I would track down on an engine that had problems. We'd track it down. When I figured out what was going on with it, I sent him after a part. While he was gone, I fixed it. He come back, he said, "Hey, what did you do?" I said, "Well, I don't know, I got lucky." So, because I wasn't going to train nobody to take my job. So I stayed in the shops for about 5 years, and then I went on the road as a trainman, brakeman. And the progressive deal on the trainman was you had to work at least 2 years, and then you could write what they call a conductor's book. Well, they didn't want too many black ones being conductors, so they made it pretty hard. And as a matter of fact, you couldn't be up. You had to sign an agreement that you wouldn't accept the conductor's job, and that was prior to me getting there.
Hello.
But and it ended up in around 1972, it went to the Supreme Court, and it was ruled that we would be fitted in to where we should have been promoted in the first place. So that made a lot of old heads mad, because they had sons and nephews and all that out there. So we went ahead of them.
Okay, I'll see it when I get there.
So, but anyway, my time on the railroad was good. It was we went through, like I say, there was one division, only division that blacks could work for what they called a rabbit. That was between Houston and Lufkin. And if they had a train that was ready to go, and they had two rested brakemen, which was usually black, and they didn't have any conductors that were rested. And remember, all the conductors at that time were white. Boy, they would go out on the street and hire a white boy, and he's your boss. You gotta have to train him, you have to tell him what to do, how to fill out a time slip, but he was still your boss. Well, that went along for a while until I say, you know, in the early 70s, when they went to the Supreme Court and they promoted us, we went around some of them. But times have changed. I remember going to Playland Park, what Sybil was talking about. That's one time of the year we could have really hurt the sponsors of Playland Park had we known to stay home, because they got rich. They got rich that one day, probably made more money from them than what the whole year paid. And so times have changed in Houston, but they haven't changed in a lot of ways. And the more you look at the news now, you realize that, you know, we still live in a dark time. A lot of hate. You ask yourself, what do a black man have to do to just be accepted? You know, we built this country, and they still don't. That's still not enough. We go to war, we lose our lives. It's still not enough. And the average young black person you ask, just ask one who invented that traffic light. They wouldn't be able to tell you. They don't know. You know, who was the first open heart surgeon? They don't know. You know? So, and a lot of young blacks, to me, seems as if they're ashamed of their heritage. You know, we have a hell of a history. And when I think about my father's side, for sure, I had an auntie that was a slave. Not a great auntie, an auntie. Had my dad lived, today he would be 126 years old. And I used to sit and hear him and one of my aunties talk about their youth and how it was. This slave, her name was Lizzie. And they said that Lizzie, when they would trade her from one plantation to the other, she would tell them. So you tell Lizzie what to do, you don't whoop Lizzie. And I understand she went barefoot, and she would hang them toenails if she had to, you know. So, you know, we all have some history which need to be transported into these young minds. Had an uncle that he actually went to prison for killing a white man. And he was taking this train, had a little train up there in East Texas. It went through the woods. It was 25 cents, no, a dime to ride this train from one place to the other. And when he got on, he told the conductor that he was going up to the mill where they worked, and to get his money that was owed to him. And he would pay him at the end of the trip. That was okay, because everybody knew each other. So I understand that they had these wood piles throughout the wood that they would stop, and the firemen would get off and load these wood logs up to fire the engines. So they stopped at one of these wood piles to pick up these logs, and the conductor saw my uncle sitting back there and told him, "Sam, come on up here and help him put these logs on." He said, "No, I'm not working, Sam. I'm paying you to ride." So he told him, "You don't come up here. When you get to the end, we're going to charge you a quarter." He said, "No, I'm paying you the dime what it costs." So actually, I understand that when he got to the yard office, his foreman and the conductor was brothers. So when he was walking out with his money, the conductor was walking in because he was going to take a quarter out of the man's money. And he gave him the dime, which it cost him. He said, I told you it was a quarter. So the guy was going to make him pay the quarter, and I think the conductor carried a pistol, and he ran out. Well, on the way out, the uncle grabbed a rifle that was behind the door there, and I understand that from what I could get, this office was sort of up, and the trusses went up to past the office there. Anyway, he went down under the trusses and was running, and the conductor was shooting at him. Well, I understand my uncle was a pretty good shot, and he shot back up and killed him. And so he ran off, and I think the high sheriff there put out that he didn't want to have to come look for him, that he promised him that he would get a fair trial and all that. And anyway, he went to prison, and he stayed in prison a long time, and the way he got out was he became the steward or the houseboy at the governor's mansion. And Ma Ferguson, she gave him a pardon. That's how he got out of prison. But and on my mother's side, they were they were light-skinned, and really they could pass for Hispanic all day long. But going back to the home where we were brought up in Frenchtown, I understand that Frenchtown got that name because in the late 40s and early 50s, there was a migration from Louisiana. They were trying to get to L.A., but they ran out of money around Houston. So they started buying little places up around Houston, and then they built a church called Our Mother of Mercy. And after the church was built, all these Creoles came in, and they surrounded and started buying around this Our Mother of Mercy. And so at one time, I would assume that Frenchtown was probably 75% of better Creole.
Yeah.
And we had little beer joints about every 2 or 3 blocks. He'd been a steward, and I have the best brother-in-law that anybody could ask for.
Amen.
This is my sister's first, only boyfriend she ever had. And I don't know how that survived, because my mother, Leonard, would come over. He would come over to our house, and he didn't know how to go home. And they would sit there and they talk, and I never did understand what they have so much to talk about. But anyway, my mother, she had a chair she could position down in the kitchen, and she could look to see every move that was made. And and like I say, Leonard didn't know how to go home. I remember one night, she would ask me, say, well, he got to drive all the way out to Piney Point, so ride with him. And one night, I did that, and Leonard fell asleep driving, and we almost went over the overpass at Shepherd.
Yeah, that's right.
Huh? And after that, he was on his own. I would tell him, if he stay late, he can stay over, but I ain't going. I ain't going. But we've had a lot of fun together, this family. And Silver, Johnnie, and all these, they've been like sisters to me all of my life. Because it look like I've been knowing them all my life.
Hello.
So that's basically my story. And like I told you, you need to pull up and make something on black railroad workers. You'll find it very interesting.
Silver was one of the first Afro-American ladies to work for the city of Houston. And so can you share that experience with us, Silver?
What is that?
About working for the city of Houston?
Oh.
Let me zoom in on you, man.
Well, I used to work with different people who I felt like would help my people. I would love to work with them on their campaign to try to get Cashmere Garden, Trinity Garden, and, that area, Fifth Ward, to work with. So I would campaign for them if I felt like they was going to be an asset to my people. And so I campaigned for Fred Hawthorne. And after the campaign was over, I went to work for him. I started off as an administrative aide. But when I went to apply, I was told to go in and apply. I was applying for his receptionist. That's what I was going to apply for. But that was a light gentleman there who had worked closely with Hawthorne's. His name was Mr. Berry. And the other man was Mr. Butler, John Butler. And when I got there, I went to Mr. Berry to tell him that I was going to go upstairs to apply for the job. He said, well, what are you applying for? And I told him that Mill Hawthorne needed a receptionist, and I was going to, and he said, you don't want that. And so I said, okay, I don't want that. He said, they have another position that I think you'd be good for. And he said, it was an administrative assistant, and you'd be working out in the field with people. And knowing how I felt about helping people, I said, okay. So when I went up to apply for the job, and I told the person what I was up there for, they said, you have to have a master's degree. I said, I don't have that. So I'm sorry, because the last person that did that had a master's degree. So I went back downstairs, and they was back and forth. So the gentleman downstairs, the black guy, was really upset, and he told me to go back up there, because let's tell the truth. When I got there, it looked like a little white farm, But anyway, to make a long story short, I did get hired. I had to go through a lot, but I talked to this Mr. Berry again and told him, well, they finally gave me the job, and he said, well, come back tomorrow and you can start. We'll take you where you have to be, and a lot of stuff. So I went back, and they had called me from HR to come back upstairs. So I went back up there and had to go through a lot of other stuff. And at that time, you could take a physical right there. And the gentleman was really, I don't mean any harm, but he was so very rude. His secretary was rude. When she would hand me the papers, she would take the papers and just hand them like that, never to me, but it was flipped to me on the desk, so I would have to get it before it fall on the floor. They were really ugly. And so, needless to say, they didn't stay there very long. But I went back downstairs and I told him that, okay, I have the position and everything is straight now, finally. And he said, well, did you get your key? And I say, a key? He said, yeah, to the car. And I said, no, he didn't give it to me. So he called up there and he said, he told the HR person, you have somebody up there to bring the keys to a car for her, because the last person that had this position had a car. Well, the last person didn't look like me. So I worked for, I think it was 5 different mayors, and I worked there 25 years, and I worked with Kathy 10 years, and after that, I mean, I was able, during that time, I felt like I worked in the field. My office was the first office was in Tuffley Park, and it was just a little temporary building they had out there, and that was my office. But in that office, I was able to hire 2 people that would be under me, and a clerk and a service representative. And we would go out in the field, and we was able to really help people. And it gave you a really good feeling, especially with the seniors, and be able to help them and have face-to-face contact with them. And it was somebody that they could go to that looked like them, and go back to City Hall and try to get things done for them. And that was a really good feeling. So I had a very good rapport with those people. But then I stayed out there in the field about 13, 14 years, and then they told me I had to go to City Hall and start working down there at City Hall and over the telecommunications section. And in there, they just took complaints for the mayor, and my responsibility was to take care of it if I could, any of the complaints. But write letters and whatever have you to the public, and it was a good job. I enjoyed working for them. Now, when I first started, women, talking about, you could not wear jeans or pants. That was just forbidden. You had to dress. You had to dress, and you had to wear stockings. And of course, it didn't bother me because I was church going personally. But I can remember going to Hoffine's, and he had an open door. Even if you were an administrative aide, or if you was a representative, or whatever you was, and if you were in the mayor's office, you were part of the mayor's office, and he would meet with us every week. And so I asked him because I just wanted to know, and he changed that policy. That, you could, he said, no, I just want you to look professional, and if you want to wear a pants, you can wear a pants, just look professional. And so a lot of things was changed for women, during that time. And a lot of my people was put in positions that they were qualified to do. They had a lot of job openings, but you can work in solid waste, you can work in public works, but that quickly changed. A lot of people became heads of department while I was there. And those people looked like me. Yeah. So there was a change. A lot of, all of them didn't have, the whites didn't have a good attitude about it. But being the mayor, there wasn't anything that they could do about it.
Yeah.